I'm Paddy O'Connell, I'm moderating tonight, and I propose that we end in 55 minutes. So I don't want to delay everyone, but I would like to ask, this is the first time the Frontline Club has hosted this first Wednesday, so we're all engaged in something quite new. So I'd like to ask at the beginning if we would all perhaps introduce, as much as possible, introduce ourselves. I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. I've asked them to tell me something of why they're different from the other panellists. And I would like to ask you who can be bothered to tell me something about you to other people who might not know. Maybe you're interested in the subject, you might very well have been there. It's an experiment, and if it doesn't work, you can let everyone know at the end. But I'm going to be strict on time because everyone's come a long way, but with such a panel, I'm not surprised. So would you like to begin introducing yourself, Amal?
Sure. I'm Amal Pasarlai. I work with the BBC World Service with the Afghan stream, and I work as a multimedia editor. Please don't ask me what is that supposed to mean. And the difference, I believe, I'm Afghan, and that's enough.
And I know you've written novels in Pashtun. When you go back to Afghanistan, how do people treat you?
Not bad. There's not much criticism of the writing.
Okay, good. Pia?
My name is Pia Heikkilä. I'm an independent journalist and filmmaker, and I've spent, since nearly 2 years ago, I fell in love with Afghanistan and have been coming and going and making films, new stories, writing for both international and Nordic media.
How long ago were you last in Kabul?
I was in Kabul about 2 weeks ago. So I was covering the election for Guardian, Sky News. I was making mainly sort of feature films rather than news.
And as a woman journalist with self-shooting, it sounds terribly difficult to me, or am I just a lunatic?
Well, I think I'm the lunatic for doing that. It's actually advantageous sometimes because I can get access to stories that male journalists would not necessarily get to. I've made quite a lot of women films when I've been out in Afghanistan, so various NGOs and for people like Al Jazeera. So it really works to my advantage in many cases. I mean, sometimes it's a hindrance if you're going on as an embedded journalist, and I'm sure Sam will elaborate on this, but it can be a nuisance that you can be looked upon as a bit of a nuisance by the soldiers.
So forgive me, Havana, would you like to introduce yourself, Sam?
Yeah, I'm Sam Kiley. I've just published Desperate Glory, which is available at a substantial discount on a table over there, which is the result of spending 6 months, a full tour with the British Army this time last year in the summer tour. I've been covering Afghanistan since 2001 and 30 wars, I think, in 20 different countries over the last 18 years. How I differ from my panelists is that I'm a baby author, not a published novelist, and this book in particular was very specifically from the perspective of British soldiers in Afghanistan.
I think that'll be a major theme for the evening, as perhaps will women and the role of Afghans. And Havana, you have something very unique to introduce yourself, I think. So please do it in your own style.
I'm also a filmmaker and journalist. I made a feature documentary called Afghan Star that came out last year, but have...
And won the Sundance Film Festival Award in its category.
And thank you, Sam. And the soundtrack is also available now as well. If anyone wants to get the soundtrack for that, iTunes. But also co-directed with my team at Roast Beef Productions another film from All Four about the campaign running up to Election Day. So got back about a week ago from Afghanistan in general.
But your first film was about the pop idol in Afghanistan.
Yes, and that's probably I haven't spent any time at all with troops or soldiers or any of the sort of governmental organisations in Afghanistan. I don't know anything about the kind of diplomacy or military side of things, but spent a lot of time, especially in urban Afghanistan and predominantly with young people in Afghanistan.
Well, thank you for introducing yourself. Could you just kindly offer something from the audience about your own name, your interest in the subject, just, you know, for my sake, if nothing else, but just to give an indication of why people are here. So just shout out, perhaps with your hand up, a few people. I knew you'd be very cautious about this. Will someone do it just as a favour? Yeah, thank you, yes.
I'm a founding member of the club, but I just go back to Kabul on Tuesday. I came back from Kabul last week, worked there for 7 years, mostly training journalists, and I'm a press officer with the UN Assistance Mission.
And going back, does it get easier for you to understand where the questions we're answering today?
Look forward to seeing you tonight.
Yeah, sounds like a no. Would anyone else feel emboldened to offer up? Perhaps. Thank you.
I'm an army doctor. Now I was in Afghanistan for 6 months last year.
An army doctor.
Yes.
And are you now out of the army?
No, still in the army.
So when do you? When's your next tour anywhere?
Fortunately, not for another 3 years. In fact, I was also with veterans.
Thank you very much. I think you can see why I'm now doing this. So would someone else do it? And then we'll
Sandra?
move to the question.
Sandra's just been.
I investigated complaints in the last election for the Election Complaints Commission, and then I've just been in Afghanistan now on the European Union Election Observation Mission. So I'm going back probably, but yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And as we go on,
She
please.
was there too.
Right, but that's it now. That opportunity's over.
Sneak.
Right, so I would like to ask your questions. And I took the decision that Afghanistan now, the news is that the Deputy Chief of Intelligence has been killed in a suicide attack on a mosque in Laghman province, which I heard on the radio is not considered Taliban stronghold territory. That's now. And I think the question we should start with for the first 20 minutes is then. The topic that has brought you here today is Afghanistan then and now. And I suspect everyone will have a different interpretation of then. So I'd like to start by offering mine. I was in New York on 9/11, due to go to a meeting at the World Trade Center in the Twin Towers. And the attacks on America on that day led, I believe, everyone will agree, to Operation Enduring Freedom, which was because Afghanistan was sheltering Osama bin Laden, we bombed him. We bombed Afghanistan. That's my interpretation of then. Would someone like to ask a question to our panelists about the then that you would like us all to consider? A question about then. Okay, the history. I'll start with you, if I may, for obvious reasons, Emil. Here we have the evocation of the 19th century humiliation of the British, the 20th century humiliation of the Soviets. What, for you as an Afghan, is the best comprehension of this title tonight, Afghanistan then and now? Where would you seek to start to draw a line in history, or we'll be here all night?
Well, to start with the British back in the 19th century, or the Russians, I mean, one should not compare now and then. Whoever you speak to in Afghanistan, nobody compare the British back in 1839 or 1890s and the British now. I was in Kabul back in 2006. The NATO chief, Richard, help me, now he is the chief.
David Richards.
David Richards, yeah. He was among a few journalists. I was also there, and he mentioned the Maiwand War. Maiwand is an area in Kandahar where British troops were defeated back in 1832 or 39. And he mentioned that, and he said that, well, the Taliban were thinking that they will do another Maiwand. And suddenly in that room, everybody got angry. But nobody said anything to him. And then I told him that, why you mentioned this? He said, why? What's wrong with that? I said, nobody is comparing you, I mean, now and then. So the minute you mention that, even your current existence is illegitimate with the people. People don't like to compare you to back then. So I think there's no compare between then and now, and Afghans are definitely happy with the after 9/11 situation in Afghanistan.
Sam, would you like to talk about that a bit? About is there a file in the Ministry of Defence that says this is how we didn't do it well last time?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of sort of issues that are raised by exactly that point. You know, first of all, there's a perception here that nobody ever wins in Afghanistan. Actually, the Brits were given a good hammering, but ended up in sort of control of the government in a similar way that the West is now. So there are lessons from history. The lessons from history are that you don't go blundering in there under-resourced, that you must seek the consent of the population in order to prevail, and that you must be perceived first as somebody who's likely to win and therefore be worth backing, and secondly as not a threat to the culture of the country. The now part of that, in terms of the British, is that they understand that. They do read the history. The military people there, I mean, David Richards is a student of history, and whilst he may have offended you, he was trying to show off that he kind of knew where he stood in the historical sense of things. But it's very important to understand the lessons of history so you don't repeat the mistakes as tragedy. Right now, that's exactly what we're doing.
We are repeating the lessons of the mistakes of history.
Yeah, we are, by going in, you know, my one, which is actually just inside Helmand. It's just off the main road, and the Brits got hammered there.
In 1817.
I can't remember the date, to be honest. It's in the book. But the Brits got hammered there when they underestimated the forces, the Afghan forces ranged against them. They underestimated their military skills, and they were outnumbered. Outfought, and you know, whilst there were brave stands and so on, they were forced into retreat. They then counterattacked and won. But the you know, the lesson there is, if you're going to do this, you don't do it lightly. You know, this isn't a place where you can go and schmooze people only. If you're going to fight a war in Afghanistan, you've got to be serious about it.
Pierre, on the question of the history, your work in there, I believe you've been to women's prisons in Afghanistan, for instance. We know the civil society of Afghanistan has changed between then and now. This is a military discussion we're having, but just to open it up for the audience, would you like to make a comment on big civil changes in the country, even if they're not universal? I think we understand there shouldn't be any generalisation, but would you like to tell me some anecdotes or share something from your work there?
Well, I mean, I can talk about the women's issue, which is very close to my heart. And one of the things that I did discover was the sort of the mood in my last trip from the women's attitude was very much of despondent and almost disbelief of what's happening.
Now.
And now, I'm starting with the now. But if we go back to then, let's look at the 5 years ago, the immediate history, which is what I know the best. Is that the women then were quite full of optimism. Karzai has just taken, you know, a new role. It was Western-backed government was supposed to bring in new changes. Democracy was very much talk of the town. And now the women were feeling almost disillusioned and very sad by what's happening to their country. And a lot of the women that I spoke to, they were afraid. They were afraid that there was going to be some form or some role that the Taliban would take in the government as a political entity. And this would again diminish their sort of the little steps that they made in the last 5 years, if you like. And to add to that is there was obviously the discussion about the Shia marriage law that caused a lot of controversy. And a part of it, as some of you may know, that was actually agreed, which allows husbands to starve their wives if they refuse sex, for instance, and other sort of rather terrible things.
In the run-up to this election, which you two would have been there to watch. And Havana, for you made a film at the very cusp of this change, where people were going on Pop Idol, for goodness sake. What's your strategy? You know, what's your answer to the question then and now? Everyone is here with many questions. Then and now, what would you like to offer at the beginning to contrast those two words?
I think probably in terms of again, just since 2001, one of the biggest differences, especially in urban areas, is how many people have returned to Afghanistan. I think that's something that's very interesting, the amount of refugees that have come back with new ways of thinking, new ideas. And it's all adding to this extraordinary push and pull that people are trying to just work out what a modern Afghanistan means and how they can find their role in this new modern society. And everyone, young people especially, are just trying to work out how they can, you know, they've sort of seen the world now. I mean, you know, a lot of people understand the modern world, but how can that be brought into Afghanistan in their society.
And would you all agree, starting with you, Sam, that this is a population, wherever you meet it, in ones, twos, tens, 20s, trying to sniff the wind? Are we going forward with a Western security-backed notion, or are we going back, for want of a better word, to a Taliban traditional establishment? Are people trying to work out where to stand?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, I remember a moment in 2001, just after Kabul had fallen, there was a fighting over a place to the south. I'm talking about the armed groups. A skilled Afghan general is the one who times the moment when he turns his turban, as they say, and joins the other side. There are people who you'd be a fool in Afghanistan if you back the losing horse. So there is a kind of material decision to be taken there. In terms of the population that I can only really talk now about Helmand, because everybody else on the panel has got far more experience elsewhere in Afghanistan. I mean, I have historically, but they're up to date. In Helmand, what people want is an absence of conflict, number one. Number two, they don't particularly want the Taliban back, but that doesn't necessarily translate into wanting the Karzai government or any kind of government back in their doorstep. So you've got an area that's been ungoverned, that has evolved its own indigenous ways of and traditional ways of governing itself. We have brought conflict. There's no resolution to that conflict, and they're not in any way enthusiastic about the Taliban, who are pretty vicious and brutal. But in the areas where the Taliban are in complete control, there is stability and there is an absence of crime.
I thought you caught my eye, I beg your pardon. I'm going to open it up just to you.
Just Steve's good looks.
On this question of then. I heard on the radio a few months ago a very chilling sentence, which was a tribal leader in Afghanistan saying to one of your colleagues there, well, you've got the watches, but we've got the time. And I hadn't heard that before, and many of you in the room may very well have heard it, but I haven't heard that used in the English language before, and it left me feeling rather cold. So here you are, you've all come and made a great effort tonight. Before we move on to the question of now, which is clearly a very difficult one, would you like to address then the history, where you were even as journalists or as members of the audience, or we can keep moving it on, but we would like to encourage you to ask a question or make a statement, depending on your mood.
I hadn't raised my hand, but you just saw me about to.
Well, you shouldn't have done that then. do mention your name.
Sold.
Something
You just bought the table.
Richard Singleton, IT consultant, no involvement with journalism, but like the Frontline Club. I'm not entirely clear anymore now whether it's the early 19th century or pre-9/11.
You define it.
But, okay, so it seems to me if we're talking early 19th century, we were talking about imperialism. If we're talking pre-1911, we're talking about drugs control. And now we're talking about defending our own borders from people coming and doing suicide bombing, which changes, in those three steps, changes the degree to which the general public is involved or even interested, and must therefore change the way the government approaches selling this to us and general perception of what's going on. Right now, very quickly to conclude, I'm assuming that most people in a kind of moment would think it's good for us to be over there to help the Afghans if we can, but we really should be only over there if we're defending our own borders. And why aren't we therefore stopping people from the UK going over there and getting trained and coming back? Do we really care about what's going on over there and pull the doctor back permanently?
Thank you for that. So I began the discussion by asking about the country of Afghanistan then, and you're reminding us that both the US and the UK population in particular have shifted their own views of this. So let's just address that on the panel.
Can I just canvass? How many people here think that the government explanation for us being in Helmand is to prevent Al-Qaeda setting up training bases? Okay. How many people believe that we're there to get rid of the poppy, which was the other argument that has been put? Kind of.
Historically, that was put, but it's
but I mean, there's a point to this. If you don't mind, Paddy, if you please indulge me. And how many people think that a good reason to be there is if we let the Taliban take over Pakistan, which has come close, the Taliban will have a bomb? And has anybody heard the government articulate that argument?
No.
So the best argument for being in Afghanistan has not been put by our own government.
So the best argument for being in Afghanistan is to be in Pakistan through the back door?
Is to draw off and emasculate and fight the Taliban in a country that doesn't have a nuclear weapon.
So we've moved to now, and it's approaching 5:30. Yes, at the back.
Wasn't there a talk at NATO last November about this? And there was some US generals saying that it would be a good sort of base so that you could deal with police China and everything like that, and then there's some boo-ham from the Chinese embassies.
There has been, sorry if I mean, there has been a bit of a kind of conspiracy theory about the establishment of Camp Bastion, which is a vast new camp, and Kandahar Airfield, which is a camp that's now been going for since 2001, that this is some kind of a base to be used both to influence China and Iran. It would be naive to think that they wouldn't be used if that influence was needed. My own theory is that they've got enough on their plate in Afghanistan.
One thing that I wanted to say about why Western troops should be in Afghanistan is that Afghanistan, for the past 30 years, since 1978 or 79, when the Russian invaded Afghanistan, Afghanistan has had no government, no functional government. The people that in Helmand that you said that they don't want any sort of government is the reason that any government in the past 30 years brought insurgents to attack them. So they don't want anybody so they could live peacefully. The reason that there is no government in Afghanistan, if there is no government in Afghanistan, Afghan neighbors, whether they are Iran, Pakistan, and now the Central Asian and Russian and even probably China, they have a very good area where they could do whatever they want to do. Pakistan can use Afghanistan against the West, Iran can use Afghanistan against the West, and the rest could use Afghanistan against the West. So for that reason, I believe it's very good for the Western countries to secure Afghanistan for their own security.
I think that huge confusion exists across all levels. I mean, there is not a single clear strategy, and none of these international agencies are talking to each other. NATO is saying one thing, the UK government is saying another thing. The Swedish government has said today, the foreign minister, that there is no exit strategy. So all of this not only leaves us in members of the European Union, but also the Afghans incredibly confused, disillusioned again, because there is no clear exit strategy, there's no proper plans. Brown said last week that we should talk to the Taliban, but didn't elaborate. This is old news. We all know that he said this many times before. He didn't say whether he wants to talk directly to Mullah Omar or which members of the Taliban he wants to talk to. There was no kind of cohesive single policy in place. At least this is what I feel. I don't know if the other panelists share this view at all.
Havana.
Well, yeah, I think that from what I can see, the Afghans are hugely confused and hugely don't understand why we keep saying we'll just let you decide. When our soldiers are dying, we're putting all this money. They're like, well, surely you should decide. Like, just say who you want, like what or who you're going to back, or what's the. It's very, very confusing, and that's a really big problem when people don't know who to back and who to support.
And just because, guided by our question here, to talk about the British and the UK, and the American population, I mean, how confused are we versus how certain we were?
Yeah, I think no one really knows. I mean, you can see that in that everyone's support for the war is absolutely declining. I mean, then the newspapers are sort of turning very against it. I mean, yeah.
And McChrystal saying 2 days ago that you need to increase the number of troops, and at the same time talking about the whole hearts and
he didn't say yeah.
Pardon me, and saying we need to boost our hearts and mind campaigns. Now, what is the Hearts and Minds campaign? How successful that has been? That there is. I don't know exactly what the figures are, but certainly with the PRTs, the provincial reconstruction teams, it hasn't been a success amongst the local population.
Well, the heart and sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Joe Phelan. I work for an international non-profit organisation that works with companies on their role in conflict zones often, but other development contexts. My question is really about the then, and there's been a mixture of that. There's been a lot of different perspectives of then, and also a lot of silence about what we all understand as then, I think, amongst this group. And I'm just interested to know whether any of the panel can give a perspective on what Afghans understand as a then. In many conflict situations or in many of our lives, we can have a moment that we remember when there was stability or security, and I'm not sure that I understand when that moment is in an Afghan context. Do Afghans have a view of a then that they are seeking to recreate, or is that also why there is so much confusion about how to build a future?
Had a brief, factual answer to that from all of you, but not a long one.
I will tell you that my parents are the best people to tell me, because no other, the younger generation of Afghanistan don't remember that for the past 30 odd years they're fighting. But my parents were always saying that during King Zahir, which was from 40s to 70, 1973, and up to 1978, that was the best time Afghanistan had. You could have walked from one corner of the country to the other without any problem. That's the then part. But please remember that since 9/11, or since 2001, December 2001, Afghans are much happy, and they talk about the then bit in between 78 to 2001. That was the hell years, I believe. That was the time that there was a lot of problem, and Afghans were feeling like they were ignored by the whole world, apart from the 10 years of the Russian invasion when everybody was interested in Afghanistan. After that, nobody bothered with Afghanistan, and as a result, the life was terrible. So Afghans are definitely happy with since 9/11 bit part.
I mean, interestingly, I spoke about 50 or so people when I was doing the election, before the election, and asking them, why are you voting? Are you voting because you want democracy? And majority of the Afghans told me, well, no, actually, they are voting for various reasons, but not for democracy, what we understand in the West. They're voting because of their civic duties, they're voting because of religious reasons, they're voting because of their society reasons, because obviously, let's not forget that there was a provincial election at the same time.
But to answer our friend, is there a comparison with a secure time?
Sorry, but I mean, I think to answer our friend about what the Afghans want in then is that I don't think that the only thing that came across in these answers was that they want peace and security for their country, not necessarily democracy the way we understand it.
A secure time is the question.
I think it completely depends as to which region you're in, because in lots of places it is now peaceful and people are being able to invest in their lives, invest in their future, and there are lots of regions when they're absolutely not, and it's completely divided as to that. But even if you're talking about economic development and how people are happy now, it's all down to economics and poverty, and this is very simple. You can be in the centre of Kabul and think you're in an amazing, buzzing town where there's roads and there's electricity now, and you can go just to the suburbs of Kabul and it's like nothing's happened and no money's coming at all. And they have completely different views on what the situation is.
I'm going to ask James to answer this. James, you were a doctor in Garmsir, Darvishan, when you were in a small company position that was under attack and with a front line that resembled the Somme. You then had a Marine unit that came in and cleared the Taliban out. Can you describe for us how that changed from the before and after perspective? In other words, did they bring security, and if so, what were the influences of that? What were the effects of that?
I think.
Need the mic.
I think about a year before I arrived there, before the conflict started, I think the locals had said that it was actually quite stable under the Taliban, out in the countryside in the south of Helmand province. I think when we came and the fighting started, then the district centre in Garmsir was abandoned, and when I arrived, it was very much a front line between ourselves and the Taliban, and it was quite simple. You know, life for the locals was quite simple because they didn't live there. I think it became complicated once the Taliban had been cleared out of the area by the US Marines. Stability then came back, there was security, and the district centre was repopulated, and then the threat changed from quite a sort of classical linear battlefront with us shooting at the Taliban and them shooting at us, to suicide bombing, asymmetric threats that come with increased regeneration, a sort of hidden face, really, of...
So the question behind you was a time which Amal says his parents would talk about the 70s and 80s, but from you as a British soldier fighting there, it's like month to month, or this time last year we were more secure than this time right now. So the time frame in certain parts of the country has shortened from these 20 years we've heard about to maybe 20 weeks.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, you know, it's very dynamic out there at the moment. And I think for the locals, it's really they are happy to have the British there, and they're happy to have the changes being exerted, but they don't trust that the change is going to be permanent.
If they stick, it's one thing. If they slide, it's another thing. Could you kindly bring the microphone here? You monitored these elections, and I will put this one to rest with your answer. The public, goodness, how we shouldn't say we know what the public think, but you monitored the elections. So what did the public think about stability?
Well, the Afghans.
Yes.
Well, so far it's just over a third of the electorate that seems to have voted, which is not necessarily the best turnout. Last election it was 50%. The campaign was better this time. The electoral administration functioned quite well. There are accusations of fraud which are being looked at the moment. I mean, it's gone okay, but we're waiting to see, and there's a lot still to play for. And I think that, you know, Afghans did think a little bit more about what they want this time. But I did read an article in the paper, in the Sunday Times this weekend, and it said Afghans are confused about the kind of democracy that the West wants in Afghanistan. And I'm thinking, let's flip that on its head. I mean, we're a little confused about the kind of country that Afghans want right now. And we think a lot that Afghanistan is controlled by international strategy. I don't think it is. I think the Afghans have a lot more power there than we think they do. And there are a lot of motives and objectives out there that we don't understand. Whether we have a policy on reconciliation with the Taliban or not, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is what the Afghans are going to do about it, and in ways that we probably won't even ever understand about all the things that motivate them. They're not just concerned about development, rule of law, good governance, the kind of things we want to have for them. They're concerned about other things, about their clan and power and all that stuff. And so let's stop deluding ourselves that we can control stuff there.
But on the Taliban bit, it does matter what Washington or London or somewhere else think about it, because for Afghans, the Taliban's condition is that one of the conditions is that Mullah Omar and others should not be in that blacklist, or he should not be a targeted man, or he should not be arrested, or whatever. The Afghan government might agree with that. The population might agree with that, because if him staying somewhere and not causing any problem, we don't care what he has done. But Washington, do you think American will satisfy with that? So the West can't.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in the sense that for the average Afghan, the importance of central government is really not that important at all. I mean, they much more rely on the local community, on the local mosque, even in Kabul, people are much more reliant on the area. I mean, I was filming in the area of Chiltun, for instance, and there I was asking people, you know, what does the presidential election mean to you? It doesn't really mean anything. The president is not a character that can bring stability and hope to these people. At least this is what I've found. So it was very much of the local elections, the provincial elections, that were much more important, because the Afghans felt that they could have a saying in the provincial elections.
On that part, the urban areas were okay with the presidential election, and rural areas were with the provincial assembly election. So that was a bit divided.
I guess so. I guess in that sense. But I did find that even in Kabul, there were people there that said, you know, what has the president done for us? We don't really need a president. You know, it's much more important to make decisions at local level. And I think the disillusionment from the last 5 years has
They don't know how much power he has. Doesn't mean he doesn't have that power, though.
Sure.
Well, there are big chunks of the country who has absolutely no power.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that's the point about the elections, Helmand, and the idea of having elections when bullets are flying up and down the street is absolutely preposterous.
And the fact that only 30% of the population came out, even in Kabul, where there was this extraordinary security on election day, it was unbelievable. But only 30% of the people felt safe enough to come out, and that is it wasn't that people didn't want to vote; they were just, you know, you
didn't want to die.
Didn't want to die, and that's.
But there's also the half of the population that didn't, you know, vote. The women.
Okay, over here.
You know, where were they?
Over here, yes, please.
My name's Stephen Gray. I'm a journalist. Again, it's a question outside of Helmand. There's one of the arguments that's been made repeatedly by ministers and others is that although the south of the country, a few provinces are engulfed in war, elsewhere there's been great strides made, and schools opened, education provided, and great amounts of development going on elsewhere in the country. And I only know myself about the sort of war-torn parts. I'm just interested if any of the panel, anyone else, has any sort of measure of whether it is true that despite the war, if you like, in other parts there is progress to justify some kind of optimism?
There's some amazing things that have been achieved. I mean, there has been, midwives as an example. There's been an incredible situation with midwives that have been improved, and that will have. There isn't the data for it because no one's had the time or the money to actually, again, do any more statistics on it. But there will be a direct effect on the death maternal mortality rate from 2001 to now. There are huge strides being made. There are huge numbers of kids going to school now that weren't before. I mean, again, it completely depends on where you are and how rural you are and how connected you are to an urban centre.
I will add to it. In the past 9 years or 8 years, Afghanistan has changed behind recognition, I believe. Thousands and thousands of kilometers of roads were paved during this time. Now Afghanistan got a circle road which connects nearly all provinces. Only I think one bit is left, which is going to be completed next year. Telephone, for instance, never ever in our history that many, more than 10 million people are now have mobiles in Afghanistan. School children, more than 6.5 million children go to school. Hospitals and places that nobody ever heard about a doctor. Now there are at least a building of a clinic, and somebody is, if the security, somebody is also there operating. Media, Afghanistan for the first time got a television in 1976. And that one television was running till Taliban banned it, and then after the Taliban, now we got more than 25 private televisions in Afghanistan, more than 500 print media. So the changes are, countless.
And how is that as an answer for you? You are interpreting the message, there are parts of the country which have improved. Is that information you can take away from the room? Did you know any of that?
Well, not those things. I think that's very, very interesting.
I'd like to focus it because I'm trying to be strict with the time. We've heard a lot about Afghanistan, but I wonder if anyone agrees that one of the questions leading up to our own general election within 12 months is Afghanistan, and I wonder if we should perhaps move the discussion in the final 20 minutes a bit more towards our own country, our own troops, our own politicians. But I will be guided by you. I'll just take a few questions from the room, and then that's my intention, unless you tell me otherwise. Can we pass the mic? You've got the microphone. Then pass it to the gentleman in the middle.
Yeah, I'll try and rephrase the question to meet with your new parameters, but with Richard Holbrooke obviously being a key figure in terms of overall strategy, more important probably, certainly as important, probably more important than General McChrystal. Do you think that his AFPAC strategy can be successful in view of the fact that Islamabad's writ does not run in the northwest frontier provinces? You just look at any map of Pakistan and it's shaded in two colours, and the one, obviously, the provinces bordering Pakistan are the so-called autonomous areas, which basically means that Islamabad's not in control. And with the border being so porous, and with the Pashtuns on both sides of the border, and with his difficulty, obviously, in getting the president of Pakistan to motivate the Pakistan army, is the AFPAC strategy credible?
Well, you're looking at me, but I think we should have an Afghan voice answer that first.
And would you like to
you're going to duck it?
And
okay.
also, would you like to define what for the rest of us what the AFPAC strategy is, and then give your answer to this?
I will also leave that to.
Holbrooke has been brought in under Obama because the Americans have actually become very good at examining what they're doing, not least because there's been a regime change, to use their phrase, and invert and re-examining exactly what they're doing. Now, Holbrooke's idea, and there are other organisations or people working on it, is that the two are linked, and he is credited to some degree or other. I'm not a great expert on the diplomacy of Pakistan, but he encouraged the Pakistanis to drive the Taliban back from when they were threatening Islamabad and the other urban areas. Actually, Pakistan, whilst it can't control the frontier districts, does control the ISI, and there are elements within the ISI that are very close to the Taliban and are a kind of fifth column, if you like. The Pakistan government denies all knowledge, so it's one of the dangerous cross-cutting currents that you've got going on there. The ISI are working. The ISI colonels have been killed by the British. So, you know, that's not speculation, that's a fact. So his role by linking them formally together gives a bit of sort of diplomatic oomph to that process. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
What was the other second part of your question?
There. I mean, just really how credible it is in terms of, obviously, if they're trying.
Well, it's incredible not to link them.
Yeah,
so it's credible to link them. So anybody makes an effort on that front is at least thinking down the right corridor.
Unless you disagrey, I'm going to move on.
I agree with that.
Well, in that case, I'm going to move on. Thank you. And you in the middle.
My question was strategic as well, actually. Picking up on earlier points made about confusion and your own point about the Taliban sort of gaining control of nuclear weapons in Pakistan. A lot of it is made about humanitarian gains in Afghanistan after the West's intervention, and we talked about how the Afghan people receive the Taliban or the West. But right at the top of the show, you explained how that was not how it was sold in the West. This was to defeat Al Qaeda because of what happened in September the 11th. And to the best of my knowledge, prior to September the 11th, expansionist policies from the Taliban was not on our radar.
Right.
I wonder about how joined up the initial strategy was in getting in to defeat Al Qaeda. We are from now where it seems to be. We found ourselves in a situation. The Taliban are fighting an insurgency against the West intervention in their country, and now we've had a bit of mission creep. We've got bogged down, and sorry, just to bring it back to your sort of new parameters, as it was put. With an election looming in this country next year, it's one thing selling to the electorate. Fighting Al Qaeda and bombs on the streets of London is quite another thing selling a very costly financial and human cost humanitarian regime mission in a far-flung land.
To you, Havana, first.
Yeah, well, it is very difficult, and it's very difficult. We're going to have to wait and see what happens in the elections, because it's going to be very difficult to justify all of this if then a government remains in power that is perceived to be corrupt and ineffective. And I think that's a major problem. I think there have been huge problems in the way that the Constitution has been set up. I mean, there's been fundamental mistakes.
And I've asked now that we move on, and no one's disagreeing with me, to the UK reaction. Would you like to say, as a British citizen, a British voter, how bad do you think it is? Would you like to give me your personal opinion? You've lived through perhaps the Falklands War, you've seen the Iraq War, both 1990 and the recent one. Would you like to compare where we are? Would you like to move on, not answer that question?
I can say whether I think it is better that there is not a country with a Taliban government. I think that is an advantage to the world.
And do you remember on 9/11 thinking, if Osama did that, we, the British, should ally with the Americans and go and get those guys out? I mean, were you gung-ho about it, and have you changed?
I wasn't gung-ho about it, and I have changed since being there.
In what sense?
I support the military operation now, and I didn't really know before as to what to believe, and now I do support the operation there, but I do think we're making huge diplomatic errors.
Right, so we've moved on to now, and we're going to address how we feel in the UK about this, and you can mention the US if you want. Pia, where are you from, and what's your perspective on this question about the UK reaction to where we are now in Afghanistan?
Well, I'm from Finland, so I don't really have a UK perspective per se. But I think as far as the ISAF troops are concerned, Finland is a member of ISAF there. I was, like Havana, I was very much anti-military when I first visited Afghanistan 2 years ago, but and now my attitude is slowly changing. I mean, we do need soldiers there in the south. They do need the support of the international forces. And whilst I'm not entirely sure about the increase of the troops, how many we should have, and what's the call and so forth, the country needs instead of 10,000 more soldiers, it needs 10,000 more doctors as well. And
you're Finnish, yes. And forgive me, but when British troops are reported, their deaths are reported singly at the top of the news.
Yes.
From what you know about the British, how long will they accept that? I mean, will it become the case that those deaths have to become reported at the bottom of the news? I mean, or will it always be headline news if one British soldier is killed? What do you think the British will? What's the British news judgment on that?
I hope they won't be reported, within 5 years' time. I really do hope that.
Well, I will say one thing, that during the Taliban, or even before the Taliban, since the fall of communist regime in Afghanistan in 1992, there was no flights to Afghanistan. Afghanistan has no shores, so there's no sea link there. Where did Al-Qaeda get into Afghanistan? How they got into Afghanistan? This is the question. And this is what I said earlier, that the minute the Western troops leave Afghanistan, Afghanistan will be a laboratory for the Afghan neighbors.
So are you telling us never leave?
Never leave, probably. The work that you do, the British troop or the American troops, they might not go on and fight forever, but they might be there, like in a base, and be a kind of a guarantee for that country.
So we should treat the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan like the Northern Ireland border with Ireland. It's our security, we have to secure it. It's as fundamental to British people as the Northern Ireland terror question.
Not only that one border, but all 4 borders of Afghanistan needs to be protected, yeah.
Okay, and forgive me.
By the way, I don't mean that the foreign troops should be based on the borders. They could be based in Kabul somewhere in a corner, nobody could see them, but still that be a guarantee.
I would also like to say that I also think that it is a long-term thing in terms of, you're looking at civil society and you're looking at development. You have to have a generation that has grown up with peace and education, and you can't expect things to change until a whole generation has happened. And the young people are very, very inspiring there, so there is hope for the future there.
I'm taking a question here, but I'd also like to ask if anyone has a contrary view, because this is obviously a discussion. So the lady at the back gets the microphone next, but you were asking to join in, and please focus it on us at home, because we've done quite a lot about people in Afghanistan. Not enough, but we're keeping it strict.
Absolutely. I'm a British Army officer working for the Military Stabilisation Support Group. I recently went to see Bob Ainsworth speak at Chatham House, and I brought up an example a few weeks before the elections. There was a large cross-tribal shura in Kabul, and all the tribal elders agreed that 20 out of the 34 provinces were too torn by conflict for there to be legitimate elections held, and they urged the international community to delay the elections. They were told, no, they're going to go ahead on the 20th of August. And I asked Bob Ainsworth what his reaction would be to those who say that we're trying to force our brand of democracy on Afghanistan too quickly. And his answer included the words, the British people need to see progress. What message do you think that gives to the panel, and where do you think we should go now?
That gives me the message which I've received loud and clear many times before, that Bob Ainsworth is a complete idiot. You cannot underestimate the profound self-delusion and deep stupidity of the politicians that on the British side are trying to run this war, or actually trying to spin this war. The British public is not so stupid as to think there's going to be overnight success, but if they're led to believe that we've built, for example, and you would know this, 3,000 wells in Helmand, and then it turns out that there aren't 3,000 wells in Helmand that we have built, we start to lose faith in the entire project. Now, what you've got within the military are people who are more broad-minded, more intelligent, better read, and more widely travelled than anybody in the political classes, and they're not being listened to.
Don't fiddle your microphone cable.
Oh, beg your pardon.
And
It was nerves.
To you. No? Anyone else on the panel? You at the back, what was your point?
I had a contrary view to the gentleman who was talking about how he wanted to have British troops or international involvement in Afghanistan forever to make sure that the pressure from neighbouring countries wouldn't allow Taliban to rise again. And I'm shocked to hear that, because surely the involvement by the international community is to ensure that we build a civic society that can do that on their own. We can't sit there and protect Afghanistan from its neighbours. We have to go and we have to help the Afghan people to build a society that will allow that to do themselves. I would be devastated, and I think many people would be devastated if our objective was to be there forever and be babysitters and kindergartners to a state that should be able to do that themselves.
Nobody is asking to be there forever. Afghans will definitely be against that. But for longer than what we are talking about right now. I mean, nowadays I hear that within the next 3 or 4 years, foreign troops will leave Afghanistan. If that happens, all the work that in the past 7 or 8 years done, that's gone.
Well, I can only hope for the Afghan people that they recognize that they have a right to govern themselves and take every help that we can give them, but also that they take responsibility for their own country.
Will you pass the microphone to the gentleman in front who's nodding? And will you vocalise what you're nodding?
Well, I'd be pleased. I'm astonished a bit that in a war that, according to most serious military people that one hears about, we're losing. We hear none of that except from Sam on the panel. That we get very much the sense that this is a winnable war, that if we protract the struggle and add to troops on the ground, which is the same story I remember when I first started in journalism in Vietnam. I heard the same thing 50 times a week in Vietnam. Then we heard the same thing in about 40 other conflicts, particularly in Iraq. Exactly the same stuff, where we're winning the war, it's protracted, it's difficult, our methods are correct, and I'm a little disillusioned to hear it. I don't hear anything contrary except from Sam.
Well, you paused, so Havana, will you address that, and Pierre, and you, Amal?
Well, I'll address it in the sense that I don't know about military tactics. I've no idea if it's a war that we can win or not. I think we're making... The only side that I can see is the blunders that we're making sort of diplomatically and sort of development-wise in terms of who we have created as the president and the government that has been created there right now. I think there are big problems there. But all I can see it from is from the people that I meet with in terms of the Afghans and the young people who want the troops to stay, and if you want a stable society, there have to be troops there. So that's all I know. I don't know if we can win or not. It's not mine.
It's not for me to say either, but I mean, going back to what Sam said earlier about the politicians spinning, and this is very much the case. They have to do this, because you can't say it's war that's going to last 20 years, because you simply can't say that. So, I mean, unfortunately, there is no right or wrong answer to this, and this is across the board. And this goes back to my commentary about the confusion. It's across the board, not just in this country, but in the Nordic countries, in European Union. I mean, simply there isn't enough efforts to pull together. And the second thing is, which Havana touched on, is the development. I mean, the development that the military is trying to do through the PRTs and other efforts of the hearts and mind campaigning and whatever they're trying to do is so short-sighted. You need a long-term development plan. You need to be able to rebuild the country after a conflict like this.
Winning, what is winning, to be honest? This is the question. If you think that foreign troops will finish Taliban, not even in 100 years. Why? There's a very simple question, answer to that. The reason is that Afghans have this tradition that if you kill me, whether you're right or wrong, my son will take revenge. If you kill him, his son, his cousin, it will go up to the neighbors then. And so that's the tradition over there. You cannot finish Taliban, but probably through talks, through whatever other way, you might put an end to the war, the violence.
But those two things you've said are precisely what got him nodding his head. I.e., on the one hand, you can't beat the Taliban. They'll come after you, their sons will come after you, their grandfathers will come after you, but we've got to stand there because it's going to make the streets of Britain safer. And I think this gentleman who clearly worked in Vietnam during the war, well, you put it your way. Have you still got the microphone?
No, I do.
Well, nail it, because we're nearly at the end, and if we don't care about this, we're all in the wrong room. So explain what you mean, and let's have another reaction from the panel.
Well, it wasn't so much that we'd actually militarily win or there'd be some divisional victory somewhere. It's that the politics of the war and the spin that's been attached to the war, I find disabling of any competent analysis in Britain. And that the result of that is that most of the stuff is seldom, if accurately, reported. There's very little reports actually on television now and on radio from Vietnam, so from Afghanistan. You transported me down here. But the result was the same confusion, I think the same delusional kinds of politics that thinks that with the presence of troops there, somehow it'll all be all right.
So say the unsayable then. What should be said that has not been said?
I think that foreign troops should leave the country.
When?
Immediately, or as close to immediately as possible.
Right, before I take the panel's view on that, we're very near the end. Would anyone like to back that view or reject that view for the sake of discussion from we haven't heard from before? We should get out, I think I heard immediately. Yes, we haven't heard from this gentleman at the front, and then the panel, you can react to that, and then I'll call it a halt.
Hi, I'm Eric Randall from Jane's. Can I make the proposition, sort of backing what the gentleman just said, that Britain's already achieved its objectives in Afghanistan simply by supporting the Americans after 9/11, and that now the goal is simply to find a way of getting out which isn't horribly, morally, an abdication of our responsibilities?
So let's start from the middle this time.
I disagree. I don't think the army should leave immediately because the Afghans need them. At the moment, the country is so unstable. And the ANA, the Afghan National Army, in itself is not able to support the country. And the police as well. It's not in a state whereby ordinary Afghans can get the support through law, through legal means, and the security that they need.
So the British mission is to make Afghanistan...
ISAF NATO should stay in the country until the country is stable. How long that takes, I have no idea. Possible gradual reduction of troops and channeling money through more development, that could be an option.
I agree, but I think there are some really fundamental economic things that you could do that would that would be very simple things like subsidising wheat prices for a certain amount of time. I think those sort of things would have huge long-term effects that would support and allow the military to leave earlier. But I think if we left now, it would be a tragedy for many people who have tried to recreate another life in Afghanistan.
And do you have a sense of when you can tell us the conditions are right to leave?
No.
So if you,
No,
we heard you, I think I've
it's a
heard,
horrible situation.
but you've criticised politicians, so I think you have to offer us more. They can't.
No, I have.
Okay. Well, I've heard the spin. On the one hand,
Well,
you can't tell us when to leave, so why should they?
Well, they're
You've been
in
there.
power, so they should know. But I'm not in power.
I mean, if I could step in, I mean, I understand the Vietnam parallels. I think they're slightly too easy to make. I think we can prevail to the point at which we can get stability so that the Afghan government can take over. It's not going to. The idea of farting around with democracy, I think, is just mad. But parking that absurdity for one moment, which of course it's central to the issue, but militarily we can prevail if we box clever, if we resource it properly, if we try to avoid even more bombing the civilian population and so on, and create an absence of conflict by prevailing against the Taliban, and then you can bring in the government and they can establish themselves, and then you can support them for long enough till it succeeds. If it doesn't, if we were to cut and run today, every single person who backed us in the West will be the most bitter individual in Afghanistan. That is how you create a wave of Islamic terror, the like of which we have never seen. And they'll get the bomb. So now is not the time to run away. Now's the time to box clever and box fierce.
I will also support this idea and also add to it that by leaving Afghanistan, Afghans will suffer differently. There's no question about that. But the West will also suffer.
Absolutely.
A quick show of hands. I could end it now, or you can tell me to go on for 5 more minutes, as Julie Tomlin has asked. So if you'd like us to go for 5 more minutes, please indicate. Okay, your question.
I wanted to ask that everything is well and good, but who will be financing all this?
Right, now our friend at the back said leave. Would you like to tell me if you think we should leave?
I don't know. I need to know the finances first.
Good question.
I don't know.
I think it's a fair question because you're one of the panel who've advised us that we need to be there a long time, and I think this is a fair question. Who's writing the check?
Again, you're worried about a few million or probably $1 billion or a few lives. You want bombing in undergrounds in London and metros in Manchester or a few $1 million?
No, but how much does it cost?
Well, I'm not an economist. I don't know.
And there's no point in just, I mean, you have to back up every military thing with proper development and proper economic strategy, not just in this sort of slightly random way of NGOs trying desperately hard to do things on their own. You just need fundamental economic investment. I mean, it's.
But you've put your finger on the political issue for the new government, whoever that might be, and we all know who it will be. Because they will have to either pull troops right back or do some very savage cuts elsewhere in the defence budget? You put your finger on what you know. Do they start, if we're going to participate in Afghanistan, do we start shutting down contracts for the Eurofighter, for the great big aircraft carriers, for stuff we don't need?
And just to keep...
So that's where the money's going to come from.
Not to interrupt you, which I obviously am doing, but Nick Clegg for the Liberal Democrats has proposed an increase in the salaries of serving servicemen and women. So do you support that as one of the panel members here? Increase the salaries for service, for fighting
You're asking me to say that. James is much bigger than me.
No, it's coming. So in other words, the messages are, although someone's telling us to get out, there are other themes in the room. Stay for a very long time, pay the troops more, and all the time a nagging bell in the back of this lady's mind, who's paying? Would you support paying the troops more?
Well, of course I'd support paying the troops more, but I mean it's much more fundamental about whether we fight, whether we resource our armed forces to fight a war, a non-specific war, brackets, probably the Russians, or the war. And if we're going to fight the war, then there are going to have to be some very serious political decisions taken that will create unemployment.
Yeah, but
so
we have an election, so we've got...
Exactly, we're going to have a new government.
We can make these decisions as voters, but you've said yes, stay, and yes, pay people more.
Yeah, but I mean, it's much more fundamental than pay.
So I'd like to forecast that around election time there's going to be some very clear messages in the press. First of all, that this is an unwinnable war. Secondly, that if we support the regime there, we're supporting a regime that's very anti-women and supports a lot of things that we're all very much against here. And thirdly, the way to solve this is to get tighter about our border controls and introduce ID cards and introduce a whole regime of control within the UK, which we all need to be worried about.
That's not how I'd sum up any of the above.
Okay. But would you like to answer him? He doesn't agree with you.
That's not what I said at all.
No, I'm proposing that at the time of the election, that's what the press is going to present to us.
I doubt it. I mean, I'm in the press. It's not what I'm going to be saying.
That's what the Daily Mail are going to say.
Well, I'm glad.
Any reaction there that there's in our election campaign
I
we'll
think
be
there's
told...
going to be a lot of press that fights very strongly against it and against it. I think it's a bit... Yeah.
Against remaining?
Yeah, I mean, the Daily Mail last week was awful. The thing about all our troops died and the Afghans didn't even bother to vote. I mean, it was an appalling sort of headline. But if that's the kind of headline from the people that are supposedly supporting military troops, then it's worrying, I think.
In Canada, just before the election in Canada, the Afghan issue was top of all the issues that are there. The government changed, but nothing has changed.
But I think us journalists will get a bit bored with stories sometimes, so hopefully not having the mean coverage, that everyone is a bit bored with Afghanistan by the time the election comes. Yes, here's hoping.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a point on winning the war and what that's perceived to be. I think from my limited experience on a local level, that tactical gains were relatively simple, and that the difficulty was providing stability and security. And I think the way it's perceived in the media, what are good things to happen in Afghanistan is a provision of healthcare, schooling, and other interventions. But I think, from what I experienced, especially with provision of healthcare, what would seem a good thing in the British media, hearts and minds providing medicine, providing hospitals, that's not sustainable. It's a poison chalice, and we saw you create a situation that's twice as worse than when you arrived.
So you're an army doctor, and under, I hope, some rules of Chatham House, although it's on broadcast on the web, do you want to offer us an opinion? Do you want to offer us an opinion on whether to get out or not? And if so, when?
No, I think we're there. For whatever reasons we went there, we have an imperative to stay. I think if we leave, we lose. You know, the moral imperative is to stay for the time.
And the last couple of questions, this gentleman here.
Hi, Mark Foxwell, Daily Mail. I just wanted to know what you think is going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months. So that's across the panel.
Yeah, and thanks for asking the question. But would you like to answer one yourself? Should we know the terms to get out? Should our debate be how to know when to leave, or should we just leave?
Well, I think that I'm not too sure really. 50-50. I don't know whatever you guys think, but
So, okay, again, your question to the panel then.
is just in the next 6 to 12 months. I'm just wondering what you think is going to happen. Are there going to be any radical steps? It's at home and also in Afghanistan.
Okay.
Yeah, at home there'll be political paralysis because we've got an election and a very serious problem with treasure. So we can't really afford this war. Nobody will be wanting to say what bits of the government budget, particularly the defence budget, they'll cut. And the new government will face some very, very tough decisions.
Ivana?
It's the next few weeks even are absolutely critical in terms of what happens, and is it going to go to a runoff in the elections, and is there? I mean, and who knows? It's just impossible to know. It really felt like when you were there that it did deserve a runoff, and that there were enough people that were against Karzai for a runoff to happen. There's been so many allegations of fraud; it's all getting very messy, and Karzai's percentages are rising, and maybe he will get over 50%. Then I think we're in real trouble. If it's seen that people's vote didn't matter and he was going to get in anyway, and he's now surrounded himself with really awful, corrupt people for the sake of the election. I mean, he's been very clever. He's been, the Afghans are incredibly politically shrewd and have been negotiating political deals for centuries. That just because people are illiterate doesn't mean that they don't understand political gains. So I don't know. It's going to be the next few weeks to see.
I think the role of IEC and ECC actually is crucial in this point, because you can annul the other. I don't remember which one you represent.
Well, no, I was in 2005.
Okay, because you can actually annul the vote, and I think that's very crucial, because what Havana said, it's kind of undermining the reason why the Afghans voted in the first place, and this can cause serious crumbling effect on across the society, then the divide across the ethnic lines.
And the question was, would you make a prediction for 6 months of our policy at home? Or?
I wouldn't dare.
I will be also talking about Afghanistan in the next few months or weeks. It's a very crucial time, especially with the election results. There is this fear among some Afghans that Western media is also, and even some Western leaders are trying to give a face to this election as illegitimate election by bringing up the fraud issue and so many other problems. The same issues were there back in 2004, but nobody bothered about it. But now everybody's talking about it. What will that do to Afghanistan is that the West will think of the next government as illegitimate government, the government which come through fraud, and Afghans will also feel like this government is not a legitimate government. And also this debate that the Western troops should leave Afghanistan or they should stay there, that sort of an argument is just strengthening Taliban. Taliban are just saying that they are losing, they are going, so let's stay.
They're wavering, so now we must not.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there we are. It's 8:15, and thank you very much indeed. We'll pause there. I'm sure we'll stay in the room. This is the first of their club's first Wednesdays, and all of your comments to the organisers about how to improve it would be very welcome. But my first suggestion would be to have a panel as kind and as educated as you in the next time in your next subject, and an audience as patient. So thank you very much for staying, everyone. Yeah.